Okay, guys, so thank you so much for being here and taking the time out of your busy schedules to be part of this project with me. This is a passion project of mine. I'm Marilyn Chakota from MCC Coaching, so mcc.coach. You can find everything on me. I have this passion project on transitioning professional or elite athletes out of sport into regular life. And this is like a really, really big, broad topic. And I feel like it's such an important thing that there's not a lot of information out there yet. And I've brought this team together. I was just saying, like, super cool. Leanda and I have known each other a long time. Jacob and Juan, we're just new friends getting to know one another. But this is something I've thought about for over 10 years, and I'm just starting to put it out there in the universe, and the right people are falling into place wanting to be a part of it. So super cool that you're all willing to be on this call with me. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go around the table intros. You can say a little bit about who you are, anything, about your past, anything like that. But let's just get a little intro out there so people know who you are. Let's start with Leanda.
Well, okay. My name is Leanda Cave. I am a former professional triathlete. I competed competitively for 18 years, and I retired at the end of 2017. I now work at a clinic in Tucson, Arizona called Innovative Alternative Clinic, which we focus on recovery for athletes and active individuals. And I'm really interested in this topic, like Marilyn said, because obviously I've been down this road. And honestly, when Marilyn says when there's not much information out there, there's really not. And I would just love to hear what the conversation can discover in what we have as resources for athletes in this space.
Awesome. Thank you. Jacob, we'll go with you next.
Sure. So my background in athletics is both in basketball. I played college basketball at the Division I and Division III level, and I knew personally that I needed something after college to keep my athletic interests going and to balance the academic and professional career that I had in front of me. So I transitioned to the sport of triathlon immediately after college. Literally the day after our team lost in the NCAA tournament my senior year, the very next day we were still at the hotel, and I was on the bike and on the treadmill getting ready for the next thing. I went to graduate school at the University of Delaware, where I did a doctorate in physical therapy as well as a PhD in biomechanics and movement science. And I am, have a lot of experience both treating and rehabilitating and studying athletes after injury, particularly after traumatic knee injury and ACL injury. I'm currently a professor at Marquette University, where I direct my own research lab called the Life After Sport Trajectories Lab. And we are keenly interested in long-term health, function, cardiometabolic health, physical activity patterns, and just overall health and wellness among former athletes. And I continue to compete in triathlon to this day as a member of the team Everyman Jack.
Nice. Juan?
Yeah, that's so cool to be here because, like you said, Marilyn, this is, we had our conversation a little while back, and I kept hungry for more, I would say, because, there's not a lot of people that I get to talk about the transition from this perspective and standpoint. So, and it touches me deeply because I'm a former professional basketball player for 10 plus years. I also played D1 basketball at Temple University 4 years. And then, I started playing ball when I was 6 years old. My dad was a professional basketball player. So you can imagine how the sports are my identity, since the day I was born. And so a year and a half ago, when I decided to let go of it from the perspective of a player, an athlete, it was a big deal, a very big deal in my life. And so, just communicating the decision, figuring out what was next, working around the transition with my inner circle, my wife, my kids, my family. It was just so many moving pieces that I started discovering what these challenges were like. And it got me to want to do something about it because I also saw as I was opening up through my struggles and challenges, I saw many athletes opening up to me and saying, like, you know, I can empathize with many of the things that you're saying. So I discovered life coaching along the way. I got certified. That gave me sort of like frameworks and tools that I could personalize to kind of give the intention of helping, sort of like a structure around a business. And I started, you know, working with fellow athletes that I knew, athletes that I got to connect with through, you know, starting to do this type of work. And I'm passionate about it because it touches personally through something that in many ways I'm still going through a year and a half after the transition. Many things I expected, many challenges I did not expect, and they were a big surprise for me. So in terms of helping my own transition, and in terms of helping or allowing me to help others go through the transition, mainly from a mental standpoint, like how can you, you know, find meaning after, you know, after something as big as sports, this really excites me, and I hope I can learn a lot of things from you guys.
That's awesome. And I think, you know, the most important thing is bringing, when you start, you know, this is like the first early stages of this whole project for all of us. And I think the most important thing is bringing the right people together. And I'm super honored that you're all willing to be here. And it's a willingness, you know, when we want to create awareness around a new topic, or this isn't a new topic, but it's something that is not talked about, or there's not allowed out there. It's the willingness to actually come together and bring the right people together and have a voice and actually say something. And that, you know, we're going to be, you know, that awareness. We know I sent a research paper out at the start of the week. I know it's super long and deep. So that's something that, you know, there's little bits out there, something like that research paper. Jacob, you're on that front end in a research position to be able to provide that. And we all bring something to the table with as far as our own personal experience, but then also working with other people. And you know, that there is, you know, Phelps did a documentary on this topic, started to create some awareness. And one of my you know, the number one goal about bringing people like this together is to create that awareness, right? That awareness. And then also the willingness from each of us to be really, really open. I think that gives a space for other people to become a part of the conversation, right? Because we're so highly trained to not talk about things as athletes that I think, you know, just bringing us together and saying, okay, this is something. And then not only is it something, but so first we're aware, but that whole idea that, hey, we can actually talk about it and put that out there. So I had sent to you guys before this call that you know, is one of my main front end goals is the awareness. And eventually we're going to create tools and programs and a space for athletes to be able to have this. So wherever this ends up going, you know, I hope that we all can take it and do, whether we continue to come together, introductions of the right people. I mean, now you guys all have each other's contact, as well as this is going to be put out to the world, and who knows who it's going to hit and be able to contact any one of us. And at the end, we're going to be able to, we'll say where people can contact us. So that's really, really cool stuff. Connections, education, tools, and resources, right? That's the cornerstone to all of these kinds of things to bring something to people. One of the things that we talked about, Juan and I talked about earlier, and where I started with this, I think one of the most important things, and I want each of us to share a story, but one of the first things I think that's important is recognizing as elite athletes is we're different, right? So the transition out of sport is something to talk about, but let's start at the beginning. The reason we were able to become high level in a sport of any kind is because we were born just a little bit different than everybody else. Right? Not everybody gets to be a professional athlete or gets to a level where they're four-time world champion, right? Or you are born, the acceptance of the fact that we are born different than everybody else. I think it needs to start at the front end of that. Before we even focus on the transition out, we need to focus on, hey, there's an acceptance mentally, emotionally, physically, the way we are and the way we're born. And Jacob, this is where I'm gonna, you know, we're all gonna share a little bit, but On the research side of things, I think what's going to help a lot of athletes understand their transition out and the tools that we provide starts at the front end on the research of why are athletes, we are just different human beings, right? We are different. Not everybody from a even like chemistry side of things has everything in one package to get to that level. So when we talk about the transition out, first, we need to recognize that we were different when we were born. And Juan and I talked about that. He talks about, he was 9 years old when he started. Most 9-year-olds from 9 to the time that they're in their 20s, they don't stick it out that long, right? There's a lot of paths that happen that they end up on a different trajectory at some point in their life, but we're just different. So let's start with you, Jacob, on that. And I don't know if I didn't, like I said, this conversation is the start of things. And so maybe this is a direction that the research gets into, but let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so I can share, I guess, first, my own personal anecdote in that, I committed to basketball at age 12, and, I started training 3, 4, 5 hours a day, every day, literally birthday, Christmas, holidays, you name it, from when I was 12 through the remainder of college. And I think that most athletes and, at an elite or, professional or collegiate level are going to be doing that. It's, it is even in college, it's a pretty much full-time job. And the exact age that people start varies. Of course, youth sport specialization, that's another topic you didn't mention, but that's another topic maybe for another day in terms of when and how early youth are specializing in sport. But it's certainly something that, there's increasing evidence. I think there's, as much of the mental component of, in terms of an athlete's success, as well as their physiology or their physical characteristics and makeups. And so there's certainly a large component to that. I could touch on some more of the research evidence if you're interested in kind of one study that I'm particularly fascinated in that recently came out, but I'm also happy to just toss it over to others to share first.
Yeah, go ahead and share the sort of your main bullet points on that. That would be
yeah. Great. So, I mean, to be totally honest, the mental side of things is not my area of expertise, and this question I wasn't prepped for it, so I'm gonna not answer exactly from that literature, but I can share something from. There was a recent study that came out published in British Journal of Sports Medicine called the Champ for Life study that looked at this diet and weight loss essentially program for midlife or for former athletes who were overweight and obese, and the key finding is that they found that through this behavioral intervention where they basically modified former athletes' diets and some other lifestyle factors, they were able to lose weight and maintain that weight loss 12 months later. And of course, I mean, we saw that it's like, okay, well, look great. But if you look at the rest of the literature in overweight and obese adults, for example, hardly anybody is successful at maintaining that weight loss. It's relatively easy-ish to lose weight, but it's much more difficult to keep that weight off. And if you look at that study, the findings are essentially they maintain that weight loss almost to a T 12 months later. And so to me, that suggests there's something unique about athletes, and these are of course now former athletes, but there's something unique about athletes where, if you give them the right tools and resources, they're great at following directions. They're great at hitting a goal and meeting a goal and achieving that goal and sticking with it, right? Perhaps even to a T. How many times do people work through injuries or train through things where perhaps that's, maybe not even the best thing for their long-term health, which is another, area of interest. But I think that's one of the studies that I'm most, that recently came out. It's just a great study that I think really highlights how potentially, the way we treat or manage or counsel athletes is different, especially elite athletes, is different than it is for the rest of the population. I think that's great evidence that really supports that.
Yeah, great. Leanda, what about you?
Well, I love that you started at the beginning, because I think that's where I did notice I was different. And I think that kind of feeds into the end as well. What I was attracted to with sport is the self-confidence I gained from winning races, competing at a high level, being recognized. Sport was my social currency. That's how I navigated childhood, my youth, my 20s, my 30s. Everything was revolved around sport, right? So it became my identity. And then obviously retiring, you don't have those same cues to keep giving you that self-confidence. So it slips away a little, you know. I feel like I'm not just like retired and trying to find a new path in life, but I'm trying to reinvent myself, because the athlete was all I ever knew. So it's very interesting, because that athlete, that kid who started sport, who was shy, who barely was able to talk to a stranger, was what brought them out in life. That's what made them shine. And that's that kid who also found like they had a competitive edge. They wanted to do everything they possibly could. It was either to have that social recognition, or it was because deep down there's like this competitive nature that no matter what, they feel they can find it, and they can have that determination and the drive to be able to persevere even after many failures. So to Jacob's point, you know, that is kind of why I think athletes are gifted beyond sport. And I think that's also, I guess we'll talk about it, but I think that's why athletes have so many positive attributes that can be put into any workspace, as long as we're trained and, like you said, given the tools.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
When we talked a lot about this, when we had the opportunity to chat just casually, it was about a month ago, and you know, you had so many great things to say on this. I love your story. Let's, if you don't mind sharing some of what we talked about that day.
Yeah, first of all, I love both things here. I love that study, and that just shows something that I see personally with my experience with working with other athletes. And I love that what you said, Leanda, athletes are gifted beyond sports. Like everything that I'm doing now, I guess from a marketing standpoint, also in terms of business, it's around the line of beyond the game. You know, I like the beyond the game. Everything's beyond the game. So the kind of like the holistic concept of more than an athlete, which I think is so necessary for especially young athletes to understand. And what I see in terms of that with my experience is that because there's so much confusion and stress that goes on once that part of your identity is no longer there, athletes need help and guidance through this transition to kind of, I guess, identify what the best way is to transfer those skills that already live within them, because that's what's going to make them great. And so the thing that I see that bothers me the most is wasted time and wasted potential. I see athletes who are 3, 4, 5 years into the transition completely stuck, just because they, you know, and many of the comments that I see from basketball players, for example, is like, well, you know, I was great, you know, I could have done this, I could have done that. And, you know, I think that's always a sign of, you know, well, in a way you're living in the past, and that's why you're not finding ways to, obviously I'm not this straightforward when working with athletes, but you kind of walk them through to get them to understand that that's all good and all, but it's not helping you move forward with intention. And the more you stay in that place, the more time and potential you're potentially wasting to start your new life, which, you know, it doesn't have to be completely different than anything you've ever done before, but it needs to be productive. And I do believe that athletes can achieve so much more success after sports than, with the right tools, than any success or championship that they've ever won, you know, as an athlete. So I think that there's a lot to that. Marilyn, you introduced to me, you know, the concept of athletes being bred differently, you know, of athletes being different. And I think that I don't know what, I don't have anything to back it up other than my own experience, but I think it's true. I think that there's a reason why certain athletes, you know, every kid you meet, most kids want to make it to, you know, it's a dream for them. And I think that I always think back to that concept. It's like why kids admire professional athletes so much. And I think it's because they realize to some extent that those athletes who made it had something that allowed them to follow their dreams all the way through. You know, I can't tell you how many, you know, friends I have who played maybe until they were 15 or 16. And at one point they had to make a choice. It was either I go to work, you know, follow that illusion of stability, or I take a risk and I go all in to see if I can make it to the pros. And a lot of them don't have what it takes to take that next crucial step. So I think that that's what makes you different. You know, you made it that way, and that just, it comes with a lot of baggage that you built over your life. But then it keeps nurturing, you know, and I think it's both a great benefit that during the transition can be also your setback, because you get so much, you put so much into it, then you kind of, and I know this happens for me and it's still happening, you kind of forget what it feels like to push through and make it there, because you start taking, like, you know what, you know, you start taking everything you have for granted, and all of a sudden you're confused without it, you know, you completely out of place. So that to say that, you know, I back everything up that we're talking about, because I what I see from my experience is when you're able to guide and help athletes identify that that's already there, and then they're like, okay, well, I see it now. Okay, and then we define a goal. I can bet money on them reaching that goal. Like that's 99% guaranteed. But the help it's needed during that transition process.
Yeah, and the big thing about what we're talking about the beginning and identifying that athletes are different. You guys are doing a great job of explaining, even just personally, how you are really, really different. And hopefully what this conversation will spark is not only more athletes to come forward and talk about how they knew right from the beginning that they're different, but maybe encourage some kind of research to be done on that, on, you know, let's take a pool of athletes and really pinpoint, identify from the beginning, what are those characteristics mentally, physically, on all different levels from a science end of things, how we really, really are different. And then the next step of that, before we even get to the transition phase, and this is the next part that I want to talk about, is not only, okay, let's recognize, identify, and accept that we are different and celebrate that. That's good. Like you said, so many people, that's a dream for them. So that's not a negative thing. That's amazing is what it is. But then we go into this long period of time, 10, 20 years plus, so the majority of our life, and we are highly trained to be a certain way. So, and these skills are refined and developed 100% towards being performance-based, right? So we talked about how, like, there is no space to come forward and say, hey, I'm struggling and I'm weak. And that's very uncomfortable for an athlete as they're transitioning. Say they're struggling through their transition, they're leaning towards depression or addiction. We saw that in the research paper that I sent to everyone. These things are real problems for people that transition out. They're lost for finding their career. The tools aren't there. And so, you know, we are trained to not express those weaknesses, right? We are highly trained to say, to be quiet, to show up, perform, never show being weak, and try and win, right? And we never show weakness to competition. So we are a certain way, and then we are put in an environment that we are highly trained and highly skilled from a mental aspect to perform and never show weakness. And then we are also isolated into a group of people that are the same as us, right? And so I've had conversations like this with first responders and military, really, really common, right? So they actually go through similar things that we do, and that now you are with your own community and you are highly trained to be a certain way. So I think this is like the next piece of the conversation that is important in developing the programs and tools that help us transition out. And I think it's important for people to really identify each of their journeys on how highly trained that is. I know for myself, I literally moved to a country with, let's say, 30 other athletes where we were completely isolated from the rest of the world, internet, TV, everything. And all we did was eat, sleep, train. And it was 100% about how we were going to show up on race day and be able to perform. And you do that with a group of people that are just like you for a reason to get to a certain level. But when we're all of a sudden expected to just be kicked back into real life, that's a pretty rude awakening to go, hey, not only was I born different, but now I've been trained for the last 15 years in a completely different way, mentally, physically, socially, the way we interact with other people, especially maybe even as females, where a lot of women are having kids and families through that time, and we aren't, or even and men too. So there's steps to this conversation, right? And so let's go ahead around the table again and share that part of it, that middle chunk before and these are all steps before we even get to the transition out of sport. Oh, we can't hear you, Leanda. You have to unmute you.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, you want me to start again?
Whoever wants to go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said, it's relatable, right? I mean, that's why we're having this conversation, because we've all been in that space where we've been bred differently, and we've not only been identified either by ourselves or by some talent identification program to be different, but we're in this space because we've been bred that same way. And the environment we've been bred in has been pretty isolated from the rest of the world in terms of what most kids learn and go through to be, executives or wherever. I'm just trying to do a parallel in a world that's not an athlete to the level we were competing at. And yeah, that's a very different space where we've developed as athletes and other kids have developed as professionals in careers. And I've always said this, when I retired, I struggled coming to terms with the idea that I'd put so much time and effort and dedication into something. I sacrificed a ton. I didn't live like a kid in their 20s. I was so tunnel vision. I didn't go out. I mean, the sacrifice is enormous in terms of the social side, but also what you sacrifice in terms of education. But that, again, that was a choice I made. And then when I retired, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I put all this time and effort and this dedication, because that's the mindset I am, it's the mindset I still am, it's the psychology of who I think athletes are, who compete and get to that level. Like, if I put all that into a different career, I would be running the world sort of thing, and I would have longevity in that career. It wouldn't stop. Once I got to that point in my career, I would keep living that career. And then when you're an athlete, we have this use by date, and it becomes very evident the older you get, and then you start kind of shuffling these ideas around about what you're going to be or what you're going to do once you do retire. Some people have had a education prior to becoming professionals. I did not. I started, but I didn't complete university. And for me, it was like, oh, I'll just go back to university, and then you realize that's not so easy either. Oh, I'll just get a job with one of my friends. Surely they'll hire me. No, you don't have any skill set. So, and then I gave out my CV, and I was like, yeah, but I was like this top performing athlete for 18 years, and I've won 4 world titles. Like, you give me something and I'll do it, and I'll figure it out, and I'll learn. And it took a few people, some people did actually adhere to that and go, you know what, she's right. Let's give her a shot. And things started to pan out that way. But yeah, in that middle section, like when you're just so driven and you want to achieve your goals, you kind of got blinkers on, like you're not really aware of what's happening outside. It's not even a thought, like when you're in this process of being a professional athlete, or what happens at the end. And I think having known now, if I knew that back then, would I have done things differently? I probably would have had a little bit more of a conversation with myself about, look, where are you heading at the end of this? And what do you expect to happen? And things, like Juan said, like things that you thought were going to happen did, and maybe things you hadn't really thought about had also popped up, and that's something that I feel we're all still learning as retired athletes.
You know what I love the most about what you said, and that whole, I love, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing so much. But what I love the most about what you said at the beginning there was the way you are mentally and the way you are driven and just the way you are as a person allowed you to be successful at sport. But that piece, this is the part I'm trying to make people so aware of as we develop the tools and programs that are going to help people, is that it doesn't go away just because we're no longer an athlete. That piece of it is what I'm talking about at the beginning. We were born differently. There's something about our brains and the way we are physically and mentally and emotionally and socially that is different than everyone else. And that's not a bad thing. It's a gift that allowed us to do what we do. But as we retire, it's not like, well, you're done being an athlete now. Now you just need to be different than that. And what you said there really, really was so cool. And so like that just hit the nail on the head. It's you retired and you still are that person. You were that person when you were born, and that gave you the gift to be as successful as you were. And it's how do we take that and really make it so every professional athlete I've talked to has that same list of characteristics. We're driven, we're able to have hyper focus. And like I say, first responders, military, snipers, they're really similar as well. So really, really love that came out there. So yeah, Juan?
Yeah, I can resonate with many of these topics, and there's one thing that comes to mind, and I think that it's, it has to do with the fact that we're also trained to chase after something, right? There's always, especially like I played team sports my entire life, there's always that individual goal and then the team goal, which is obviously ideally always to win a championship or win a tournament. And so I think that, and I realized this afterwards, subconsciously you're always moving forward, you're chasing after something, and you dive so much into it, that the only thing that really took my eyes off of my career, and I know, like, my wife doesn't like that I say this much, but it's my kids. Like, when my kids were born, that's when my mind started opening up a little bit about, well, there's more to life than this. Until then, not even my marriage, not even anything, it was just basketball. It was my life. And I think there's a part of that helps you get to where you get to at such a high level. There's also a part of that you pay price for when you transition out. And so I think that with that, the biggest thing that I try to do in my case, and that I try to help athletes with, is finding something meaningful to chase after sports. I think that the feeling of this ending, it's really what gets you, there's what's forward. And like, let alone athletes, any human being, like, you have to have a mountain to climb. Like, it doesn't end when you get to the top. Like, make sure there's something higher that you're going to go after. And when you end your sports career, it's like, well, it's up to here, because that's 100% of your life in many cases, or at least 95% of it. So there's nothing more. So how can you come to that realization? I think the earlier you can realize that, then the better down the line. But we go back to some of the things that were being said now, athletes don't really see it that way. I didn't see it that way. I see it now. So one of the big challenges I have today is that how can I communicate that to fellow athletes in a way that's not pushing them to do something that they don't feel comfortable doing, but again, making them understand something that it's going to be extremely beneficial when the time comes. And, you know, so maybe you can avoid hitting a wall, you know, like I did and many others do. So, yeah, I think there has to be some sort of like realization of exploring other things that make you passionate so you can have that meaningful pursuit after sports. Even if it is within sports, say from like a coaching perspective, at least you're aware enough to know that that's something that you want to chase after because it's going to be meaningful to you and purposeful, and that's going to be sustainable, you know, because honestly, like you have 2/3 of your life left. It doesn't end there. So, you know, that's sort of everything that I can speak from my experience that I see of, you know, how we're bred and nurtured to think, and what I see that it can be such a benefit when you're an athlete. That same thing can also be the setback that you find when that's gone, you know, so there has to be sort of like a balance, to make both. And now, like the golden question for me, it's like, because honestly, and this is, you know, something I'll be open here, and I talk about this a lot with people that I come across, is my career ended up at 31 completely burnt out. Like I was mentally exhausted, drained. So then I look back and I think it is because, you know, since I was 12 years old, I literally, basketball was everything, and I missed, you know, family events. I didn't have, like in Argentina, kids have like after you finish high school, everybody does a trip together and they get away. I couldn't go because I had games, I had to play. I missed my brother's wedding because I was playing. So all of these sorts of things and sacrifices that, you know, I would do them again if I went back. And I think that they were necessary for me to do what I did, but it took a toll. And at 31, I was depressed and completely burnt out. So is there a way to approach your athletic career without having it have to get to that point? That's a big question, and it's one that I'll probably never have the answer. But I think that as we talk about these things, for athletes to understand, well, you know, there's a lot of different things at play here. You know, what's the best way for me to, you know, be able to approach this from a lifetime perspective, not just a career perspective.
Yeah, and I love that the most common theme on this part of the conversation is that we were highly trained to have blinders on. That wasn't by accident, right? The environments that we were placed into to become successful. And I do think it is necessary to take that personality and that we've identified who we are, and then to nurture that into a level that is at that level, that very, very top 1% that people don't get to. It is necessary to have those blinders on. And we were placed in environments and we're able to handle that. That's another gift that we have that other people might go, I'm not doing this, and they leave, right? They're not willing to. That's another way that we are mentally and emotionally and socially just a little bit different than everybody else, is that we have that, we are put into an environment where we are expected to have the blinders on. We are highly trained to be in that environment, and we're able to handle it, because that's not something that mentally and emotionally most people can even endure for a long period of time, and they find a way out of it, or they just leave, because it's just the most common thing I hear new professional triathletes say is they can't handle the boredom, or they can't handle the isolation, or they can't handle, and they just are like, I'm out, right? So that piece is also very important for saying, hey, we're different, and then we are highly trained to continue to build that difference. And I do think it is necessary to hit that level, but what is important is these conversations, and then the next step would be the tools that are put in place and handed to people as they know they're on the way out. Jacob, I think you have some really cool things to say about this part of the conversation.
Yeah, so first off, I just think this is a fantastic conversation. I'm just delighted to be here. And I really appreciate Leanda's and Juan's just really openness and vulnerability and sharing kind of personal anecdotes. I certainly could share personal stories of my own sacrifices and the things that I've, done with sport, but what I really want to focus on is some of the conversations that I've had with some of research participants. So one of the things that I get to do at Marquette is in our research lab, Life After Sport Trajectories lab, is we're doing a qualitative study. So it's basically a semi-structured interview with former elite athletes, and they all have participated in sport at least at the college level, and some went on to play professionally as well. We've interviewed about actually a little over 50 participants as well as part of our ongoing, much larger mixed methods NIH funded study. And in this, we actually presented findings to the American College of Sports Medicine on some of these themes that athletes talked about. And while the primary study is really focusing on those long-term health and kind of that post-retirement, there's a couple of themes that I want to share that are really pertinent to this conversation, because they're really themes that transcend time. And one is athlete identity. We've all talked about it. We all know that it's there, but this idea of this athlete identity and these strong subcomponents of competitive nature and pride and confidence and potentially leadership and things like that are just really prevalent in athletes and former athletes, and that then those permeate into all facets of their life. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's a challenging thing. I can attest to one former athlete talking about kind of this work event where she's now 20, 30 years out of high level sport, and she and this other former athlete were like going at bags or cornhole, whatever you want to call the game, and they are just talking trash to each other and going at it. And the rest of the work people there were like, oh my gosh, like, is this okay? Like, like they just didn't even get it. And like, it was, but that's just the competitive nature. And like, they were doing it. They were having a great time. And, it's one kind of silly example of it, but it's in our lives. We want to win. Whatever we're doing, we want to win, right? We want to, like I think like Juan said, is, there's a tournament, there's a championship, and your goal is to win. Your goal is to be the best, and your goal is to put the work in, even if it's single-minded focus, to do that. And that does sometimes translate really well into workforce, but it also sometimes needs channeling or sometimes need the right thing. The other area that I want to touch is these transferable life skills, which many of the athletes kind of talked about is transferable life skills and how much what you learn in sport, whether it be that drive or that work ethic, as well as those leadership and teamwork skills. I mean, and that's the exact nature that varies sport to sport. Team-based sports versus individual sports is a little bit of nuance and difference, but we have to work together with other people to accomplish a common goal, and that's regardless whether you're participating in track or swimming, or you're playing basketball or football. But you are working together, and oftentimes with people who, frankly, you wouldn't have, especially in some team sports, there's people that you wouldn't ever come in contact with, that they maybe are from a very different socioeconomic background, a different country, a different part of the country, right? There's people where you essentially are put together and work together really well to accomplish this common goal, which translates great into many work environments and business environments and things like that. And several of our former athletes who are now in 50s, 60s, and are in very high level, some of them are in very high level leadership roles where they're hiring and firing and managing teams of many people. And they will often, several have said to us how they would choose the athlete, over the person that maybe has better grades or better, some other aspects of the resume, but they would choose that high level athlete because they know they have the drive, they know they have the work ethic, they know that they will figure out a way to get it done, and that they've got all those different skill sets. And how much of those are innate or you're born with, and how much of those are trained and refined over the years or decades of 3, 4, 5, 8, whatever it is, hours a day of, training. And, as many have said, that single-minded focus of, trying to be the best you could possibly be at your sport, and how really that can translate. But I completely agree that there's a lot of room for growth and room for developing tools, resources, programs to help with that, to help facilitate that transition, that process.
That's really cool. And, I'll share this story. I've shared it with friends. I've shared it with Juan, and it just sort of, adds to the story. And we know that there's pitfalls for these transitions, that what we're trying to avoid for athletes. And some of them, like I said, they're depression, addictions, being misunderstood in society and social groups, isolation, all of these things that we want to avoid for athletes. And one thing that I used to do is train sport horses and show jumping. And horses, they don't have emotion, they don't have, the human element. They're just an animal. And if you take a high level Grand Prix horse, or you take a high level race horse, or let's even say if we know, racing greyhounds, those kinds of things, they're an animal. And you would think that when they're done doing that, they would be happy to be just sent out into a pasture and eat grass for the rest of their life, right? And there are very specific protocols for stair-stepping down a Grand Prix horse away from elite level sport to throughout the rest of their life. And the same goes for, if you look at racing greyhounds, it used to be that racing greyhounds, once they were done racing, they said they can never be a normal pet again. So they just put them down. Right. And then they developed these programs for adoption of great racing greyhounds, because, and even anyone who adopts one, they come with a whole protocol of how to be treated, how to integrate them back into being a pet, and how they are for the rest of their lives, even approached by people. With Grand Prix horses, if you just take a Grand Prix horse from competing at that level and you throw them into a pasture, they develop things like pacing a fence line right down to the dirt and putting wounds from the fence on their necks and their legs. They develop another habit called cribbing, where it's just like an addiction. They grab onto fence posts or metal and they inhale, and it gives them a high. I've seen horses become physically ill. I've seen horses get to a point where they become so physically ill that they actually die. And these are horses, you would think, oh, it's an animal. It's just going to go from being kicked around by a person around these courses to, yeah, I'll happily hang out in the pasture with 50 of my other horses. And that doesn't happen. And you could put them out there with a bunch of wild Mustangs, or you could put them out there with just a bunch of field ponies that just go and do trail riding. And the sport horse that was at a high level Grand Prix will not behave the same. They will develop these issues where they kick at a fence, they will physically hurt themselves, they lose their hair, develop illnesses, develop cribbing, all of these things. So my point on sharing the story is, again, there isn't any research. We don't have any really fun, research diving into this stuff, but I think it is starting, that one research paper, a little bit of the work that you're doing, Jacob, but it's not just people. And it's right across, like I say, whether it be, fight dogs are illegal even, they say you can't do that. You can't take a pit bull, train it into a fight dog, and then release it into someone's home to be a pet. They're dangerous, right? So how are we as elite athletes expected to be born different? We are slightly different because we can do it, then highly trained in an isolated environment to be different for a number of years. And then that next transition, how do we transition now into just being kicked into the real world? Oh, now we're going to be a house pet, right? And how we retire, like you mentioned, Juan, really matters as well. Was it due to injury? Was it due to age? Was it on our own terms? Was it because we had a happy retirement, we were happy to retire, or were we pushed out of the sport for a reason that wasn't on our own terms? These, I think, also are different layers of types of transitions and what mentally and physically, what an athlete will go through, and really important to make sure that we provide the right programs and tools and conversation and awareness around it. So one of the things, and I will ask each of you to share what you've done and maybe are even in the process of doing, you've shared a little bit. One of the things I found the most helpful with sport horses, and even I recognize this because I had the opportunity to work with sport horses when I transitioned myself, was when you're in the trenches of it, you might not necessarily know exactly where you're going. But I can tell you one of the pieces that is really important is providing something similar to the routine that you are used to. So there is something about picking a very specific routine that won't make sense to the rest of the world. And Leanda, we train together. You've moved back to Tucson, so we can really, people say, why would you even ride your bike as much as you do anymore? A normal week's worth of exercising for me, and I retired way back in 2012, is still between 16 and 20 hours of exercise a week. And most normal people be that's crazy. And I'll say, yes, it is. It is crazy, but it's part of this whole conversation, right? Normal people aren't going to understand you. Healthy and normal would be, I'm going to go to the gym maybe 3 or 4 days a week and lift some weights and do 30 minutes of cardio. I don't do that. I never have. I never will. It's not who I am as a person. First, I recognized that. And I knew that there needed to be a stair-stepping process out of this. You mentioned something really important, Juan. I needed to make sure that I still continue to have progression and goals. So when I first retired, I went to a completely different sport where I knew no one was going to know me and I was going to feel, progression and be able to hit goals and targets and all of those things. So having a really good exit strategy or tools in place, one was I needed to have similar routine, wake up at the same time every day, have somewhere to go around people who were goal driven and going to be learning a new skill in a trade, being around athletes, things that seeing progression. So little things like this. Environment. So being somewhere where it was going to be sunny and dry every day for me was important. The type of people I was going to be interacting with was important. So I'm giving little sort of scattered pieces to what this can look like and what I did personally, but there is a very much a well thought out, okay, I need to have dopamine every day because I'm used to that. So I need to exercise every day. I need to have very structured routine that is similar to the one I'm used to. I wake up, I go to bed at the same times. I eat very similarly. I go somewhere every day. I pick something that is maybe away from what I did before and I see progression and I have goals, these kinds of things. And then once I did that for about 4 or 5 years before I even did any cardio ever again. And then it was 5 years post-retirement before I was okay enough to get back on my bike and could do that as a normal person somewhat. So that's a little bit of my story. And I know I've kept you guys a long time already, but I'm hoping you're willing to stay on just a little bit longer and touch on this part of the transition. And this is the piece that is that latter part that I hope we're all going to take this conversation and build more information, more tools and everything just to build off of this. Like, this is the piece that we have so much to give back to people. So Jacob, you've got a big smile on your face. I know you just went, but I want to hear what you have to say, because you're like shaking your head and smiling.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to share my own personal story on this. And I think I was pretty insightful as a teenager. I first saw the Ironman World Championship on TV when I was in high school, or maybe it was actually middle school, but somewhere in that teenage years when I was already like so committed to basketball, wanted to play college, wanted to, play the highest level I could. And from a really quite early age, I was like, that's going to be my next thing. So I had already identified it as a teenager. And I told people, like, when I was in high school, and especially when I was in college, like, yeah, I'm going to do triathlon next. Cause I knew I needed like something to like channel that competitive drive, to channel, to exercise and to focus on it and do that all kind of stuff. And some people would be kind of like, yeah, okay, like, sure. But like, it worked for me. And then what I did is, and I think, I basically as a 23-year-old, like I basically learned to swim. Like I think swim lessons when I was a kid. I grew up by the water. So like, I like wasn't going to like drown, but like I had zero competitive swimming background. Let's put it that way. So I was swimming with my like, Olympic trials friend. She's like doing multiple laps and I'm like getting to one end of like taking a bunch of breaths. Like I'm really fit and I can't swim at all. But anyway, for me, it was this great experience of, I needed somewhere to channel all of that and still train and work and you can accomplish a lot of goals. I mean, now I'm only, we're about 10 years into triathlon. And so I'm still relatively, young to a sport. I think 10 years is kind of what it takes to begin to start to master something, right? And so it's like I'm still getting a lot better at triathlon, or at least I believe that I have the potential to be, right? And so it's something different for me. I know from research perspective, we've seen a lot of other athletes who do that same kind of, that are successful at moving to the sport. Whereas, like if I were to just go play basketball now, I wouldn't be as good as I was and it wouldn't be the same high or that same, that same feeling. And I don't think it, I don't think it would have worked. I really almost stopped cold. Like I played in like one men's league, and that was it. And I could share stories of musicians and athletes and such like that, but I'll leave it at that and just share my own personal story for that one. But it's certainly been helpful for me. But I will say, from a vulnerability question, the question remains like, was that actually a transition, or was it just kind of choosing one sport for the other and delaying that actual transition?
You know what you said there at the end was really, really huge, because goes back to the beginning, what we're talking about. You're different than everyone else, who you are as a person. And you understood when that one chapter was done, it was important for you to have something in line to keep those same things, right? You knew you needed something to focus on, you needed the routine, you needed something to feed who you are as a person, and you were just born differently that way. And so by just instinctually having that ability to do that, because transition to me isn't necessarily about we're going away. It's like, this is who you are, this is why. And then we have to provide the awareness and tools to create spaces for people to understand that. And so you were able to do that successfully without, without anyone telling you that. You did it on your own, which is fantastic, because other athlete stories might be, I struggled with depression for 2 years. I committed suicide. These kind of, all of these things, they're real, and that's a heavy topic, and to just throw that out there, but it happens, right? And you instinctually knew, hey, it's not necessarily about transitioning out of sport. It's transitioning means we're able to take who we are as a person, identify that, make us aware, understand the journey, understand the tools that were developed, and then give people what they need to take that into the next chapter of their life. So Leanda, let's go ahead and talk about that for you a bit.
I just want to rewind a little bit to what you said earlier about horses and dogs. It blows my mind that they have these programs in place for race horses, race dogs, and not humans. And
Right.
I'm kind of really disappointed to hear that. It's a fascinating fact, but at the same time, I'm just like, man, because I think when we talk about like transitioning, I had this exit strategy, right? I had this thing which was the coaching side, which I morphed into before I retired, because I wanted, and I thought more of it as from a fiscal point of view. Like I wanted to make sure I had revenue when I retired, because through my success as an athlete, I did generate income, assets that had financial responsibilities tied to them. So I wanted to make sure I could honor my financial responsibilities. So I always thought of it from that perspective, but never from the psychological point of view. And through this conversation, I love it, because I've actually been learning a lot. But what's really obvious is like, when you're a professional athlete, you're with like-minded people. You're with your people. You're with these people who are different from a young age, right? And then as you retire, like you're no longer in that space, and your bubble has burst, and you're amongst, let's call them normal people. And for me, like now, like it's clear that I don't interact the same way with normal people. I don't have the social skills of normal people, but also my expectations of people around me. Like I think these people around me should think the way I think, and they don't, and they shouldn't. But I didn't, because I've been in this space of an athlete for so long. It's just like, surely that's everybody. Surely that's normal, but it's not normal. And what I can say now is like, I think I've got a little work to do from a psychological point of view. Like I said, I retired at the end of 2017. So let's say 5 years retired. I mean, I'm in a place now where I'm learning and I'm gaining new skills and I'm running this company. I'm having a great time doing it. Marilyn knows I'm exhausted all the time and I can't figure out why I'm getting slower, not faster when I ride a bike with her, because I've never been in a job where I'm at an office 9 to 5. Actually, my hours are 11 to 7, but still, I've never been in that place before and it's exhausting. And here I am thinking, oh, I can just like hit the road and ride with my buddies. But I want to be riding with my buddies. And it's not because I want or I have any connection to the athlete who I used to be, who was freaking amazing. And I'm good for her, but I'm not that athlete anymore. I've completely accepted that. But I feel like that space I need to be in when I'm out riding my bike at 5 or 6 in the morning is, I feel like it's the place that kind of keeps me with my people and keeps me like, it enables me to be the me who I was and who I know. And it makes me feel like I'm in this place of acceptance. And so that's kind of where I am now. I feel like it's still a journey for me. I don't think I've kind of got to the place where I feel like maybe Jake and Juan, you are already, which is awesome. But I feel like I'm definitely better now than I was maybe a couple of years ago. With all these changes in life after retiring, I think I've got to a point now where I'm striving for a new goal, and I have a purpose every day to wake up, and I have a reason to go into the office. So I feel like I'm kind of in the athlete that I am has found their space in the real world.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that and being so vulnerable with all of that. I think one of the most important things that you said there is that you've discovered that you need to interject the environment that you know is important to you. And knowing who you are as an athlete and who you are as a person, again, going back to that we're born differently and then it's highly trained. One of the pieces and one of the tools that we can give transitioning athletes is understanding that being in a place where you can have access to that environment that you're used to is such a huge part of this transition piece. And like I said, there's lots of pieces to it. There's the routine and the social aspect and skills and all of those things. But without even having this conversation on your own, you realized I need to wake up at 5 a.m. every day and be around my people because they understand me and I'm able to be myself and that's one of the pieces of it. It's environmental, right? So I think there's as far as how we're wired and trained on the schedule aspect of things, you're used to getting up every day really early. So it forces you to do that, as well as then you're environmentally out in the sun, which is what you're used to. You're given that dopamine every day, which doesn't matter that it's not on a world champion level. It's what your body needs and craves on a chemical basis. And then environmentally and socially and emotionally, you're in a culture and an environment that is part of who you are as a person. And through that training period, those 20 years where that was, isolating and highly trained. And so you already understand that that's a really important part of who you are as a person now forever. And that's going to help your transition skills and help other people if they can understand that and find that really quickly, like you did, Jake, right out of basketball. You knew this is important, and good for you for really knowing that. And you avoided a lot of things that way. So that's really cool what you said there, Leanda. Juan, we talked about this with you a little bit as far as like you went to basketball games in cities where you're like, I'm like, did you go to cities you don't remember? You joked about coming to Tucson. You're like, yeah, I came to Tucson. I didn't see any of it, but this piece of it is really, really important. You shared some great things with me on this.
Yeah, I have 3 or 4 thoughts in mind after hearing everything. I think this is such a cool conversation. I hope we get to do it, more other times, but I think that what you say, Leanda, it's powerful, and I think that it's, you know, I can resonate. I know a lot of athletes who would resonate with what you're saying, and so I think that the first thing to say to that is, you know, the way I try to work through the transition with athletes is like, well, you know, we're going to have a structure, you know, sort of like just to know how we're moving forward, but it has to be a flexible structure. It has to be very personalized, because, and to that, to say that self-awareness is that first step, because, you know, as you start gaining that self-awareness of what it is that you need for you, you know, for that transition, then you can start working through that. And for example, in this case, Jacob, I know you were, you know, very, very clear on what you needed, and you went and tried and experimented, and you know, it worked for you. But I find that it's not the same for everybody. And so I think that's a key point to understand, that within that flexible structure, coming to grasp that self-awareness to see, okay, well, this is where I'm at. And, you know, you can't know where you're going unless you know where you're standing first. And I think that that's where it starts. I'll go back a little bit to just one thought I have about the horses, and it fascinated me so much when we talked about it last time, Marilyn. And I think that there should, and maybe this is for you, Jacob, there should be a team of people that maybe from like a physiological standpoint try to understand what happens, you know, in those horses' bodies, or like, you know, in terms of, you know, what changes, what is there. And I think there could be a lot of correlation in that. And when you mentioned it last time, I read a little bit about it and sort of like try to inform. There's not much there, but it says that these horses, you know, the theory is that they get confused and their stress levels, you know, go up very much, and so that's why they start acting this way. And so, you know, I can tell you that a lot of athletes, the same thing happens. Stress levels go up, confusion, and, you know, you don't know which way to go. So I guess for homework next time, maybe there'll be some research done with that. And then in terms of like what's needed after, and all the things that you guys were saying, I think that for me, the one that really hit me by surprise was the routine. I didn't understand what was happening, and it's like, well, you know, I came to realize that I didn't know how to fill out the time of my day, and I didn't feel productive. I didn't feel like I was moving anywhere, and so that was a big one for me. And I know many athletes that the same thing happens to them. It's like, well, my entire life I was, you know, I had to stay in shape for a living, you know, and when my career ended, you know, I put on some weight because I stopped doing everything. I said, you know, nobody's going to make me exercise if I don't have to. And I know a lot of athletes that went through that same thing, and you don't realize that it not only messes with your health, it also messes with your mind. Like, it's not healthy from that standpoint. And it's also a way to add some routine and structure to your day. So, you know, I try to make athletes understand that it's needed to keep doing something, you know, and to not just stop completely. If you want, like, gradually slow down the load, maybe not the same as you were used to, but keep doing something. And then the other one that was helpful for me was playing sports for fun again. I can't remember the last time that I had fun playing basketball, and I couldn't play other sports because my contract said, you know, don't you dare get hurt playing something else, you know. And so I could only do basketball. Then it turns into a job, and, you know, you lose sort of like the essence of how you started. And so going back to competing and playing sports for fun was such a big thing for me, and it really helped me through the transition. And then I think the one you guys mentioned, and I think it's key, is community. It's try to stay around athletes. You know, we talked, all this conversation was around, well, we're different, you know, we're nurtured different. We also speak the same language, you know. You can tell when you're talking to a former athlete. And in that sense, LinkedIn turned out to be incredible for me. I connected and networked with so many former athletes and people in this space that now I can, you know, just set up a call or pick up the phone and talk to through the things that I'm going through. And I think that if you can find your own, like, sort of like a mastermind group of transitioning that you can just call and just chat, it's huge. And it's a big part of the work that I try to do as a coach, as a transition coach, is sometimes athletes just need to be heard. They just need to talk it out and feel like there's someone in their team, in their corner, cheering for them and believing in them, even, at times when they don't believe in themselves. And that's something my coach said to me that changed the way I approached it. It's like, well, I know that you're probably not, your self-belief is low now. Well, you can borrow mine, because I know that you have what you have within you. And that changed everything for me, and you have that sort of, as an athlete, you have coaches, you have teammates, you have your team captains who are, but here it can feel like you're alone, when in reality you're not alone, but it can feel that way. So if you're intentional about building that community, it can really help. So I think that those are the three things that, from personal experience and what I see, can really be tools to help athletes during the transition.
Yeah, that's so great. And the community part is, I mean, honestly, that's why we're all here today, right? We're all from completely different walks, and some of us have known each other a little longer. Leanda and I have known each other for a very long time. Some of us are brand new to one another. But like you just said, Juan, we all are instantly comfortable with one another and can share the exact same conversation, even though we just met. And I think, like you said, we're going to find that across the board, whether someone's a golfer or they're a football player or basketball, triathlon, running, track and field, whatever it is. I think we're going to find that common thread. And that was my main goal. And I'm so appreciative for you guys being willing to have this conversation and come on here and chat and just start. This is a passion project of mine and something I've thought of, like I say, for 10 years. And eventually you have to just start somewhere, and I think just us being willing to share these things, have these conversations, what you're doing, Leanda, Jacob, we can all come together, have these conversations. I wanted to make awareness, create a space for that community, and create a willingness for conversation. I think the more open and willing we are to be vulnerable and talk about these things, then other people will, right? And it just becomes about people who are in the same community and the same, we have all these same skills. We are all really high level people, and finding each other and making that happen. So I think, I can't say enough. Thank you so much for being willing to come here today and have this conversation. I hope that from this, it launches, who knows where, this is a start. So it's like where this launches to, I'd like each one of you to share where people can find you, where we can have this conversation more, where we take this as a team. I look at us now, hey, we're a group. I picked you specifically because I believe in each one of you have something really great to offer in this space, and we can come together, help one another, have this new community, branch it out to more, create new tools, awareness programs, those kinds of things. And I just, I think it's really exciting. And I really, really thank you for being willing to do it. So go ahead and share where people can find you, any closing thoughts that you have, and then I'll let you guys go. I've kept you here a really long time. So thank you. Leanda, go ahead and start with you.
Okay. You can find me, Leanda Cave, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I also work at the iaclinic.com, ia-clinic.com. So that's where you can find me at work. And some last thoughts, I just, with Juan, he mentioned a few things that really, his takeaways, and what he's learned. I just feel like what I think people who maybe are in our place and haven't quite got to the point where they've retired or in that space of transitioning over, like, they need to know that they're not alone and it's normal, everything they're going through. And it's not, it's a process, and it doesn't mean that your career has ended. I think it's just the start of a very new career, but don't be afraid of using the skill sets that you have mentally to be in that place, wherever that may be.
Love that. Jacob?
Yeah, so I'm an assistant professor at Marquette University. You can find me, of course, all over our faculty pages, Jacob Capin at Marquette University. Our research lab is the Life After Sport Trajectories Research Lab. You can find us on our webpage, www.lastlab.org. And then I am also personally on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well. And if you are a potential, if you're a former athlete looking for research on this kind of stuff, look up our website. We have a link for former athletes as well as healthy controls to participate in research if you're in the greater Milwaukee metropolitan area within a few hours. And then also my lab is a growing and vibrant research lab with opportunities for training for master's, PhD students in the exercise and rehab science program, and all sorts of others. So we have our webpage has current positions and opportunities for employment or further education as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Juan?
Yeah, I'll definitely be reaching out, Jacob. I think it excites me, and if I can be of help to the research you guys do, I'll be more than happy to do that. And for me, you can. So I got my website is Juan, JUANM Fernandez.com, and that's where there's more information about the work that I do. But the best way to reach me is LinkedIn. I'm very active daily there. I also share daily posts to kind of like share my story and hopefully add value to people, mainly athletes, from what I learn, that something that they can get out of and take away. But yeah, those are the two main things. And thank you to you, Marilyn, for putting this together. I think this has been incredible, and so happy to meet you, Leanda and Jacob. I hope we keep this conversation going, and I offer my full availability to keep collaborating and partnering, because I think that it's a much needed area that athletes need help and guidance and support. I think there's not enough of us doing this out there for the amount of athletes that need it. So hopefully we can create that awareness, collaborate, and help more people. So I hope we keep this going.
I agree completely with Juan and echo his sentiments. Thank you, Marilyn. Great to meet you all, and very much looking forward to continuing the conversation. I too am happy to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I will let you carry on with your days. I'm going to be putting this together, and I'll send it all to you and share it with the world, and you're welcome to do whatever you'd like with it. And I just really appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch from here. So thank you, team.
Thank you, Marilyn. Nice to meet you, Juan.
Thanks, everyone.
Jacob.
Should we